I never thought I'd feel this hollow, this betrayed, this abandoned. But here I was, 8 months pregnant, staring at the cold walls of our apartment, the echo of my own heartbeat filling the emptiness. I had spent years building a life with him, trusting him with everything, my heart, my dreams, my family. And now, that same man, the father of my child, had vanished from my world, leaving me with nothing but silence and betrayal. It started with the small things, missed calls, late-night excuses, his attention drifting away like smoke through my fingers. At first, I convinced myself it was stress, work pressure, maybe even some mid-pregnancy anxiety making me overly sensitive. But the truth hit me like a freight train. My husband, the man I had sworn I'd love forever, was having an affair. And not just with anyone. No, he had the audacity, the sheer audacity, to betray me with my best friend, the one person I had confided in, the one I trusted with my deepest secrets. I remember the day it all came crashing down. I had just returned from a routine doctor's appointment, my belly swollen with life, when I found them. Not in some dramatic scene, not in a confrontation I could have prepared for. No, it was a silent revelation, cruelly delivered through the casual voice of a neighbor who didn't know she was shattering my world. "Oh, I didn't know you didn't hear," she said, fiddling with her keys. "They got married last week. She's moving in with him, and wow, your timing, 8 months pregnant and all." The words pierced me, sharp and unrelenting. My chest tightened, my stomach twisting with nausea that had nothing to do with pregnancy. I sank onto the couch, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it was a nightmare I could wake from. But no, this was reality. My husband, my best friend, my family, all of it ripped away while I was carrying the most innocent, most precious part of me. Days blurred into nights. My parents tried to comfort me, but what could anyone say to someone who had been abandoned by the people she trusted the most? I walked through the motions, doctor visits, preparing the nursery, arranging the essentials for a newborn, while my mind spun with questions. How could he? How could she? Did they not care that I was here, alone, carrying a life that belonged to him as much as it did to me? And then came the property. My father-in-law, the man I had once respected, the man who had smiled at me at every family gathering, did something so shocking it left me reeling. He transferred all his property to my unborn child. Not to me, not to my husband. I woke the next morning with a cold clarity that frightened even me. The events of the night before, the audacity of his return, the desperate pleading in his eyes, had crystallized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to admit. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist. Every wrong, every betrayal, every hollow promise he had ever made would be accounted for, and I would be the one delivering the reckoning. The first step was patience. I couldn't rush this. Revenge, I realized, was an art form, and like any masterpiece, it required precision, timing, and understanding the weaknesses of your opponents. My husband and my former best friend were arrogant in their ignorance. They believed they could manipulate me with guilt, charm, and hollow apologies. They thought I was broken, but I had a plan, and every move I made would be calculated, deliberate. I began by observing them, not in a haphazard way, but with the kind of quiet attention that could make someone's skin crawl if they knew. I learned their routines, the patterns they relied on, the small cracks that revealed their vulnerabilities. I discovered that my husband had grown complacent in his new life, believing he had nothing to fear from the woman he had wronged. My former best friend, too, was careless, overconfident in the security of her new status. They were a team in name only, united by convenience, not by loyalty or wisdom. I started subtly, small disruptions, things that would make them question their sense of control. I left anonymous notes hinting at truths they preferred to ignore. I spread rumors among mutual acquaintances, carefully constructed so that they were believable but impossible to trace. Every whisper, every glance, every hesitation in their interactions became a tool. I was no longer just reacting to their betrayal. I was orchestrating it, guiding it, shaping it like a conductor guiding an orchestra of chaos. But this was only the beginning. The true advantage lay in the property. My child's inheritance wasn't just a legal safeguard, it was a weapon. I learned everything I could about its legal standing. The first time I saw the fear in their eyes, I felt a cold thrill run through me. It wasn't satisfaction, it was validation. Every careful step, every whispered secret, every patient plan I had laid out over months was finally beginning to bear fruit. They were no longer untouchable. Their arrogance had blinded them to the storm they had sown, and now it was unraveling around them, quietly but relentlessly. It began subtly, as all effective revenge does. My husband, once so confident, began noticing the small disruptions. A missed meeting here, a sudden error in a document there. At first, he blamed stress, overwork, the daily chaos of life. But soon he realized it wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Someone was undermining him, making him appear incompetent in ways he couldn't explain. And every time he tried to investigate, the trail led nowhere. I watched from a distance, a calm observer, as panic. The night was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world itself is holding its breath. I had waited for this moment longer than I could measure, planning every detail, every move, every whisper. They had been warned, subtly, indirectly, sometimes with cruel precision, but they never understood the scope, the inevitability of what was coming. Tonight, it all ended. I had orchestrated everything to perfection. My husband's life had been unraveling for months, a series of missteps and exposed failures that he couldn't trace back to me. My former best friend's social and financial standing had been subtly undermined, her careless habits now fully exposed to the people who had once admired her. And all the while I had remained a calm observer, my heart beating steadily, my mind calculating the perfect final blow. It began with a gathering. I had invited both of them, under the guise of closure, a final attempt at reconciliation that would seem plausible. They arrived, smug at first, expecting charm, apologies, maybe even tears that would soften my resolve. But what they didn't know was that everything they thought they controlled, their image, their story, their lives, was now completely in my hands. I led them to a room prepared for revelation. On the table lay documents, files, and evidence I had meticulously gathered, financial discrepancies, legal reminders, anonymous confessions I had orchestrated to appear from concerned acquaintances. Everything pointed to the truth they had ignored, the consequences of their choices, the reach of their arrogance, the fragility of the lives they had tried to control. This, I began, my voice calm but firm, is the reality of your actions. Their faces, once confident, began to shift, confusion first, then disbelief. My husband's hand twitched, as if he wanted to grab the papers to challenge the evidence, but he stopped himself. My former best friend's lips parted, and I could see the panic building behind her carefully maintained composure. "You thought you could betray me and walk away," I continued. "You thought I would crumble, that I would be powerless. But every move you made, every lie you told, every careless decision you thought inconsequential, I documented, I observed, I planned, and now you see the truth." I handed over a folder to my husband first. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages, eyes widening as he recognized the errors, the failures, the exposures. Every client, every colleague, every financial misstep he had ignored or caused was now laid bare, meticulously linked to his actions. His face turned pale, and I realized then that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment he understood he was no longer untouchable. Then I turned to my former best friend. I presented the evidence of her financial recklessness, her indiscretions, her carelessness, that had now been exposed to those who mattered. Her confidence crumbled, replaced by fear, as she realized that her life, carefully constructed on charm and deception, was collapsing under the weight of her own choices. "I trusted both of you," I said, my voice trembling only slightly from the adrenaline, "more than anyone, and you betrayed me in the worst way possible. But this is not just punishment, this is justice. Every action has consequences, and you, for the first time, are facing yours fully." The room was silent, the air thick with tension, the kind of tension that leaves your heart racing and your mind sharpened to a razor's edge. They had no words, no defense, only the cold, undeniable truth of the consequences I had orchestrated. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You see, I didn't just survive," I continued. "I thrived. I protected my child. I secured our future. And now you understand what happens when arrogance meets patience, when betrayal meets strategy, when cruelty meets determination. This is the reckoning you brought upon yourselves." My husband's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" I echoed, my eyes narrowing. "You didn't realize that your actions would have consequences? That abandoning someone who trusted you completely would lead to this? You had every chance to be honest, to protect what mattered, but instead you chose betrayal. And now you see what that means." My former best friend was shaking, tears forming in her eyes. I didn't know it would." "You didn't know?" I interrupted, my voice firm. "You didn't know because you never cared. You acted selfishly, recklessly, blindly, and now, for the first time, you are facing the result of your choices. Not just words, not just apologies, not just regret, but reality. I could see the realization dawning on them both, the panic, the helplessness. And in that moment, I understood fully that my patience, my strategy, my calculated planning had worked. They had underestimated me from the start, and now they were powerless to stop the consequences I had meticulously orchestrated. Then I brought in the final element, the legal leverage of my child's inheritance. My husband's face drained of color as I reminded him that every asset he had once controlled, every decision he thought he could make unchallenged, was now under the protective oversight of my child's legal guardianship. No manipulation, no charm, no desperate pleading could change that. The reality of their vulnerability, the reality of their diminished power, hit them like a physical force. "You thought you could control everything," I said, my voice rising slightly, "but control is an illusion. You thought you could destroy my life without consequence. But life has a way of balancing itself. Justice isn't always immediate. It's precise, calculated, and inevitable. And this is justice." The final moments were quiet, but the intensity was unbearable. I watched as they absorbed the full weight of their actions, the fear and regret settling in where arrogance and complacency once thrived. They couldn't hide, they couldn't manipulate, and they couldn't escape. The web I had woven, patiently and relentlessly, had trapped them completely, and as I looked at them I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction, vindication, and release. I had not sought revenge out of hatred alone. I had sought justice, protection, and the affirmation that strength emerges from betrayal. I had endured, planned, and executed, and the outcome was undeniable. Finally, I stepped back, my eyes meeting theirs one last time. "This is the end," I said softly. "Not of me, not of my child, but of the illusion you created. You are free to live, but never again will you underestimate me, or the consequences of your choices. Remember this night, remember what betrayal costs, and above all, remember that patience and precision are far deadlier than any impulsive act of cruelty." I left the room with my head held high, feeling lighter than I had in months. The storm had passed, but the lessons it carried remained. I had faced betrayal, abandonment, and despair, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and victorious. My child would grow up protected, loved, and surrounded by justice, not arrogance. And as I closed the door behind me, I knew that nothing, not betrayal, not lies, not abandonment, would ever hold power over me again. I had survived, I had planned, I had acted, and justice had been served, perfectly, irrevocably, and completely. Because revenge is not just about satisfaction. Revenge, when combined with patience, precision, and love, is justice. And tonight, justice had been mine.